Hello there, and welcome to Mr. Sleepy Science, a quiet corner where questions drift gently, answers unfold slowly, and science moves with the calm rhythm of waves sliding toward the shore. Tonight we're traveling somewhere shadowed, not frightening, but ancient and hushed, a realm that begins just beneath the surface and slips into the deepest, most secret places this planet holds. Regions more mysterious than even the barren face of the moon. This evening, we descend into the deep sea, or rather, into the wonder of why, despite everything we've accomplished, so much of it remains untouched. Strange, isn't it? We launch telescopes into galaxies, land rovers on dusty Martian plains, map stars thousands of light years away. Yet the ocean stretching just past our toes still lies largely unmapped, immeasurable, almost dreamlike in its vast remoteness. And so I wonder, where are you listening from tonight? How far are you from the nearest shore? A few miles? Hundreds? Perhaps more. Curious, isn't it? The sea surrounds our world, and still the deep is a place we never truly enter. If this slow drift into wonder helps you settle, quiets the mind, or gives your thoughts something soft to rest on, I'd be grateful if you'd like the video or subscribe to this small, sleepy harbor of science. It helps others find their way here too, to rest, to learn, or simply float for a moment. I do hope this journey doesn't stir your curiosity so much that it keeps you awake, though if it does, you'll be in gentle company. Anglerfish glowing in the dark, ancient currents drifting like forgotten lullabies, and deep-diving vessels humming quietly beneath the waves. So go on, let your shoulders loosen, take a slow, deep breath, and let's begin. Because somewhere between the bright shallows and the mountain-swallowing trenches lies the quiet story of why the deep sea remains so unseen. Have you ever stood at the shoreline and felt small? Not in a painful way, not like you're shrinking, but in that soft, enchanted way where smallness feels sacred, where it feels like being folded into something far bigger than yourself. The horizon smudges, the water murmurs in a private conversation with the moon, and beneath those delicate surface ripples, an entire unseen world keeps breathing. The deep ocean stirs a particular kind of wonder, not fear, not awe, but something older, something instinctive, a silence that makes your mind lean in, as if whispering, "What else is there?" We call space the final frontier, but the deep ocean doesn't feel futuristic. It feels forgotten. Not out of reach because it's far, but because it's close and still unknowable. That strange pull, familiar yet alien, gives it a dreamlike quality, like remembering a place you've never really visited. And when we think of the deep sea, we don't picture charts or numbers. We picture feelings, darkness without end, flecks of bioluminescence blinking like trapped constellations, the solitary call of a whale echoing across liquid dusk, weight, stillness, secrets. For many, the deep lives not in facts, but in fables, teeth that shine, ghost ships drifting without crews, lost cities resting beneath coral domes. Even today, when we hear unexplored ocean, we imagine the mythical before the mechanical. Leviathans, abysses, forgotten things. And isn't it strange how a part of our own Earth can feel entirely disconnected from daily life? We wake, scroll through news spanning continents, watch hurricanes twist from satellite vantage points, view Mars in high resolution. And still, if someone asks, "What's at the bottom of the Mariana Trench?" the most common answer remains, "I'm not sure. Something strange." That strangeness isn't about distance, it's about perception. We measure places by how easily we can picture ourselves in them. A city, we imagine noise, pavement, movement. A hiking trail, we imagine boots on stone. Even space, we imagine spacecraft, of course. But the deep sea? Try to visualize it, not coral reefs, not kelp forests, but the Hadal Zone. The pitch-black, freezing, crushing expanse below 6,000 meters. No light, no familiar sound. Just pressure, stacking heavier and heavier, like invisible towers pressing downward. Here our senses fail. No handholds, no sky, no ground we can truly imagine standing on. And in that emptiness, our imagination fills the void. There's a concept in psychology, the uncanny valley, that unsettling feeling when something is almost familiar, but not quite. Recognition without comfort. The deep ocean holds its own version of that uncanny space. It is Earth, yes, but sideways. And then there is the silence. Not the gentle quiet of a bedroom at night, but the cathedral-like hush of immense ancient pressure. A stillness so absolute that it feels like the ocean itself is holding its breath. That silence creates a kind of distance, not fearful, but reverent. And that distance isn't just emotional, it's physical. We are creatures of land and air. We breathe freely. We navigate with light. We depend on orientation, gravity, sensation. But the deep ocean rejects these conditions entirely. It's not merely unfriendly to human life. It is incompatible with it. Sink to the average depth of the sea without protection, and you would be crushed long before reaching the bottom. Sunlight disappears early. Sound bends strangely. Gravity becomes confusing in the absence of visual cues. Up and down blur, and our brains, shaped for the familiar, quietly choose to focus on places we can comprehend. The deep, slipping away not just from sight, but from understanding, becomes easier to ignore, harder to fear, harder still to feel connected to. And so perhaps it makes sense that we speak of the ocean in halves. The ocean we know, surface waters, boats, beaches, light. And the ocean we don't, a world beneath the world. Still, we imagine it. We imagine creatures evolving in isolation, glowing, drifting, slow and ancient. We imagine wrecks resting in darkness, vents exhaling minerals like breath, geological scars tracing stories older than language. Because for all its darkness, the deep sea is not empty. It is alive, wildly, abundantly alive, just outside our reach. And maybe that is the most irresistible of all.
And maybe that's what makes it so irresistible, the notion that the unknown still survives. In a world where nearly everything feels mapped, uploaded, reviewed, and neatly categorized, the deep sea remains a place that refuses to be pinned down. It keeps its mysteries not out of hostility, but out of silence. And that silence, in an odd way, feels generous, as if whispering, "When you're ready, I'll still be here." We often picture exploration as conquest, flags pressed into soil, borders crossed, frontiers overcome. But the deep sea doesn't operate on those terms. It doesn't resist, nor does it welcome. It just waits, vast, cold, patient, asking us to slow down if we want to understand it at all. And strange as it seems, that patience offers a peculiar comfort. In a world rushing forward, accelerating by the day, the deep sea remains timeless. Not mystically, but geologically. It doesn't move at our pace. It existed long before our languages and maps, before our technologies and stories, and it will remain long after we're gone. So when we ask why it remains unexplored, maybe the answer isn't that the ocean withholds, but that we hesitate. Not out of laziness, but because the mind, like the body, has its own depths. And those aren't reached quickly. They're entered slowly, reverently, with wide eyes and quieter hearts. The next time you're near the sea, on a shore, or even listening to a recording of waves, pause. Not for what you can see, but for what you can feel beneath the visible. That soft pull beneath the surface, that unnameable presence, that whisper of mystery. That is the deep. Not just water and pressure, but the part of our world that reminds us that discovery isn't always loud. Sometimes it arrives as a murmur. And maybe that's why the deep stays untouched. Long before we had sonar, submersibles, or scientific terms like Hadal Zone, humans gazed across the waves and dreamed. They didn't label it with data, they filled it with stories. The unseen ocean wasn't empty to them, it was full. Sometimes benevolent, sometimes dangerous, always sacred. In nearly every ancient culture, the deeper you ventured, the stranger the forces became. In Mesopotamian mythology, the sea was Tiamat, a primordial goddess of saltwater and chaos, the very substance from which creation emerged. Not just ocean, but the essence of existence before form. The Greeks imagined their own abyss, Okeanos encircling the world, Poseidon ruling its moods, storms, and monsters. Sailors feared not just tempests, but creatures that might rise from darkness and drag ships below. Sirens, whirlpools, krakens, symbols of an ocean alive with intent. In Norse stories, the Midgard serpent, Jormungandr, circled the world, slumbering beneath the sea. When it finally moved, the world would end. To contemplate the deep was to contemplate fate itself. In Polynesian cultures, the ocean was ancestor, guide, and spirit, something to travel with, not conquer. The depths were inhabited by forces to be honored, not challenged. Indigenous Australian traditions speak of the rainbow serpent, not always oceanic, but tied to the sacredness of water itself, movement beneath the earth, shaping landscape and life. Japanese folklore told of Umibozu, the sea monk, a ghostly figure emerging without warning to overturn ships and vanish into fog. Not literal sightings, perhaps, but reminders that the ocean listens, remembers. Across all these myths, the deep sea wasn't simply a place, it was a presence, a symbol of the unknown, dangerous, divine, or both. And even as centuries passed, those stories didn't disappear. They merely shifted. Medieval maps labeled the world's edges with "Here be dragons," sketching fantastic beasts where knowledge ceased. Those drawings weren't errors, they were placeholders for human imagination. When fact faded, myth stepped in. Some believed the sea dropped off at its end. Others imagined lost continents, Atlantis, Lemuria, civilizations swallowed by waves. When the age of steam arrived in the 18th century, curiosity about the deep surged again. Jules Verne wrote 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, imagining not just machines, but mysteries, glowing creatures, sunken ruins, abyssal plains. The Nautilus may have been fiction, but the wonder it evoked was very real. And as science advanced, so did metaphor. Freud compared the mind to an iceberg, a tiny visible fraction above, an enormous hidden world below. The deep sea became a symbol of the unconscious, murky, strange, essential. Poets like Eliot, Plath, Neruda turned the ocean into a language, a place where emotion and meaning collided. Even music carried the sea, shanties, folk songs, ballads, lullabies, all echoing the depth, the danger, the beauty. And as our instruments grew sharper, our metaphors didn't vanish, they simply took new forms. Today, we still say unfathomable without remembering it once meant too deep to measure with outstretched arms. We still speak of plumbing the depths, not for oceans, but for emotion. We call something oceanic when it overwhelms us with meaning or beauty. This is the deep sea's legacy, not just as a physical place, but as a vessel for human wonder. And that matters, because how we feel about a place shapes how we approach it. We didn't explore the ocean like we did land. We revered it, feared it, sang to it. And even now, with all our tools, that reverence lingers. Maybe that's part of why the deep remains unexplored. Consider this. When we send a rover to Mars, we call it exploration. When we send a probe to the bottom of the ocean, we call it descent. Same goal, different feeling. Down there, we descend as though entering ourselves. Our ancestors lacked cameras and sensors, but they had intuition, a kind of spiritual sonar. They sensed what science later confirmed, that the deep isn't empty, only unreached. And in every attempt to reach it, we carry more than equipment. We carry myth, memory, longing. Even now, we dream of Atlantis, build imaginative underwater worlds and games, write stories of sea creatures rising, stand before aquarium glass, not just to watch fish, but to feel something stir inside us. Isn't it something that after thousands of years, we still stand at the edge of the ocean and wonder, still whisper stories into darkness, still listen for answers in the pause between waves? It's simple to say the deep sea remains unexplored because it's inconvenient, expensive, dangerous. But maybe, just maybe, a part of us doesn't want it fully mapped. Maybe we need places that stay mysterious, not because we fear them, but because they remind us that wonder is still possible. Because what is the deep ocean, if not the first frontier, the last sacred space? We studied the skies and found equations, split atoms and found uncertainty. But when we look into the sea, we find ourselves, our past, our dreams, our questions. And maybe, for now, that's enough.
Let's drift now from myth into method, from imagination into investigation. Because while the deep sea awakens stories in the mind, it also presents real challenges to the body, the machine, and the mind. To understand why the deep remains so untouched, we must first understand what deep sea truly means. The ocean isn't a single endless chamber of blue. It is layered, like sliding slowly into night. Each level grows darker, stranger, more removed from the world we recognize. At the very top is the epipelagic zone, the sunlit layer where light dances freely and photosynthesis feeds thriving ecosystems. This is our familiar zone, where we swim, fish, sail, dream. Below it, from about 200 to 1,000 meters, lies the mesopelagic zone, the twilight region. Here, sunlight fades, temperatures fall, and many fish develop enormous eyes or bioluminescent pulses, soft flashes of blue and green drifting like underwater fireflies. Deeper still is the bathopelagic zone, the midnight region, stretching from 1,000 to 4,000 meters. No sunlight ever touches this place. The water is icy. Pressure reaches over 5,500 pounds on every square inch, as if an invisible elephant stood on every inch of your skin. Life here moves slowly, purposefully. Creatures drift not for speed, but survival. Below this is the abyssopelagic zone, 4,000 to 6,000 meters. Temperatures hover near freezing. Food is scarce. Many organisms survive on marine snow, a steady shower of microscopic debris, dead plankton, fish scales, fragments of decay descending from above. A quiet feast in a quiet world. And then beneath even this lies the hodl zone, the trenches. Narrow valleys carved by tectonic forces. Depths that plunge to 11,000 meters or more, deeper than Mount Everest is tall. Less than 1% of this realm has been explored. And in the hodl world, the ocean becomes mythic again. Not because it's supernatural, but because reaching it is almost miraculous. So why haven't we gone deeper more often? The first and most unforgiving barrier, pressure.
At sea level, we live under 1 atmosphere of pressure, the weight of the air above us. But every 10 meters underwater adds another atmosphere. At 1,000 meters, the pressure becomes 100 times what we feel at the surface. That isn't just uncomfortable, it is fatal. Human bodies cannot withstand such conditions. Lungs collapse, tissues compress, senses fail. So we build machines. But machines suffer too. Pressure crushes metal, deforms glass, snaps cables, destroys electronics. Designing something that survives down there, let alone functions, is extraordinary engineering. Consider Alvin, the legendary deep-sea submersible operated by Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. Since the 1960s, Alvin has carried scientists down to 4,500 meters, revealing hydrothermal vents, discovering new species, even visiting the Titanic wreck. Yet its passenger sphere, a titanium shell nearly 7 inches thick, can hold only 3 people. Descent and ascent take hours. Time near the seafloor is precious. Only a handful of vessels can go deeper. The Trieste reached the bottom of the Mariana Trench in 1960. The Deep-Sea Challenger, piloted by James Cameron in 2012, returned with modern instruments. More recently, the limiting factor began making repeated dives to the deepest points of every ocean, proof that technology can reach extraordinary depths. But these missions are rare. Most deep exploration relies on remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, and autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs, machines controlled from ships or programmed to roam alone. Yet even these face limits. Cameras must survive crushing pressure. Electronics must be insulated. Communication underwater is slow. Radio waves fail, so we rely on sound and cables. Batteries drain quickly in the cold. Currents push machines off course. Exploring the deep is like navigating a pitch-black cave with fragile tools remotely, while everything around you.
There are now global initiatives working to map the entire seafloor by 2030. The Seabed 2030 Project, a vast collaboration collecting sonar data, public charts, and new expeditions to build a complete, high-resolution portrait of the ocean floor. Not just for curiosity, but for safety, for understanding tsunamis, for submarine cables, for climate research, for migration studies, and for conservation. But even a map is only the beginning. You can outline a trench, but you cannot know it without descending. And that is the beautiful difficulty of ocean science, that every discovery reveals a deeper layer waiting beneath. The deep sea remains unexplored not because we lack interest, but because the scale of the unknown is so immense. The barriers are not only physical, they are philosophical. How do you explore what you cannot see? How do you measure something shifting under your tools? How do you respect a world you may never fully touch? These questions stretch beyond engineering. They ask something of our character. What kind of explorers will we become? Will we rush, extract, flatten the mystery into the familiar? Or will we pause, drift, listen? Because the ocean is not threatened by curiosity. It is large enough to absorb it. But what it asks for, quietly, persistently, is humility. And perhaps in return, it offers something more profound than knowledge: awe. If the ocean were a story, the deep sea would be its most haunting chapter. Not its conclusion, not its climax, but the quiet place in the middle where the world slows, the light dims, and the reader leans closer, listening for a whisper they're not sure they heard. By now we've traced the limits: pressure, cold, darkness. But those are just boundaries. Inside them lies a world so vast it might as well be another planet, and yet it is right beneath our feet. A biosphere that challenges nearly every assumption we've held about life. The story begins with mechanism, how life functions in such extremes. On the surface, sunlight drives everything. Plants capture photons, transform them into sugars, and pass energy up the food chain. But sunlight never reaches the deep. And still, life flourishes. Not all life needs the sun. In the 1970s, scientists discovered chemosynthesis, microbes turning chemicals like hydrogen sulfide into energy. These bacteria form the base of entire ecosystems, living not because of sunlight, but despite its absence. They gather around hydrothermal vents, cracks in the seafloor spewing superheated fluid from Earth's interior. These vents build towering black smokers, chimneys of minerals rising from the seabed. Around them thrive tube worms 8 feet tall, with no mouths or stomachs, their bodies filled with bacteria that feed them. Blind shrimp navigate by sensing heat. Pale crabs crowd together like pilgrims around a sacred flame. Here, life is sculpted not by light, but by heat and chemistry. These worlds don't just rewrite biology, they reopen the question of how life began. Many scientists now believe early Earth may have birthed its first organisms in such environments, where warmth, minerals, and shelter offered a refuge from a violent young planet. If true, then similar vents might exist beneath Europa's ice, or inside Enceladus, or in ancient oceans long vanished from Mars. In this way, the deep becomes not just a frontier, but a cosmic clue. Yet vents are not the only thriving oasis. Cold seeps, places where methane and hydrogen sulfide seep from the seabed, host calmer, steadier communities. Mussels, clams, symbiotic bacteria. A quieter world than vents, but equally vital. And far from both, on the abyssal plains, life endures on marine snow, a slow rain of organic debris falling through darkness. Sea cucumbers vacuum it, worms sift it, fish drift, waiting for a faint taste of falling sustenance. The deep is a world defined by scarcity, and thus by elegance. Creatures here live long, move slowly, reproduce rarely. Deep-sea coral forests grow for centuries. Greenland sharks live for 400 years and don't mature until around age 150. It is a world of patience. But patience is fragile. A trawler passing once can erase centuries of coral. A mining machine scraping the seafloor can smother ecosystems in sediment clouds. An oil spill far above can sink, grain by grain, poisoning the depths. The deep is stable, but that stability makes it delicate. So scientists approach it with reverence. Light can frighten animals. Noise can confuse navigation. ROVs can stir sediment. Even the simple act of observing leaves ripples. And then come the anomalies, the places where the deep breaks its own rules. Brine pools, lakes within the ocean filled with water so salty it forms its own surface. Cameras show them like mirrors laid on the seafloor. Life gathers around their shores like wildlife at a pond. Mud volcanoes release methane in icy streams. Frozen lattices of methane hydrate build shimmering fields like underwater glass. Dead vent fields, once vibrant, now stand like ghost towns. And then there are the sounds. The deep is not silent. Hydrophones record earthquakes humming through water, whale songs echoing for miles, strange metallic croaks from unknown creatures, mysterious booms with no clear source, named things like the bloop, Julia, upsweep, signals that travel astonishing distances in water's dense median. And we wait, listening. And we've learned we are not the only deep explorers. Sperm whales dive a mile to hunt giant squid. Elephant seals plunge thousands of feet using subtle echoes to navigate. Sleeper sharks drift in pitch black, slow and ancient. These animals experience a world we struggle even to imagine. What do they see, or hear, or sense? We don't know, but we're beginning to ask. And then further come the biological outliers, giant isopods lumbering like armored beetles, colossal squid with dinner plate eyes, barrel-eye fish with transparent heads, mysterious creatures with lights, fans, tendrils, and shapes that look imagined. Gigantism flourishes, miniaturization flourishes, evolution experiments freely. Some creatures migrate hundreds of meters every night, the largest daily migration on Earth.
rising in darkness and sinking before dawn. Some octopuses brood eggs for 4 years without feeding. Anglerfish males fuse into females, becoming small living appendages. In the deep, biology is not strange, it is appropriate. And still, for everything we've learned, we know almost nothing. Millions of species remain undescribed. Currents shift in patterns we struggle to trace. Pollution sinks deeper than we expected. Microplastics appear in amphipods from the deepest trenches. Oil from spills drifts slowly downward into sediments. The deep is no longer untouched, simply undermeasured. And its importance is global. It stores carbon, circulates heat, balances climate. Disturb it, and the planet responds, slowly, quietly, but significantly. So when we ask why we haven't explored the deep, maybe the question is larger. Maybe we're only beginning to understand how much it matters and how much it asks of us. Meanwhile, technology evolves. Autonomous vehicles map the seafloor in exquisite detail. Cabled observatories remain for years, sending constant data upward. DNA samplers read biodiversity from drifting cells. Artists join scientists. Nations collaborate. Engineers refine quiet machines. A new philosophy forms: exploration without disturbance, presence without damage, knowledge with care. A kind of listening, because the deep does not need to be conquered, it needs to be remembered. And perhaps that is why, after all this time, it still draws us, not for answers, but for wonder.
A new kind of exploration is emerging now. One defined not by flags planted in distant soil, but by the footprints we deliberately avoid leaving behind. Because the deep sea is not waiting to be claimed, it is waiting to be acknowledged. And maybe that is the quiet lesson it has offered all along. Long before sonar beams, titanium hulls, or high-pressure cameras existed, long before we had scientific language for vents, trenches, or abyssal plains, humans stood at the edge of the ocean and wondered. They didn't call it research, they called it ritual, survival, curiosity. Stone tools in their hands, driftwood at their feet, waves whispering something they couldn't name, the early hints of a hypothesis forming. Something is down there. Something moves. For most of human history, the surface of the ocean was all we knew. We sailed it, fished it, feared it, worshipped it. But the deep remained as unreachable as the stars, and in many ways, even more intimidating. The Greeks imagined monsters in the depths. Their scholars, like Aristotle, cataloged sea life with impressive precision, but only what existed within reach. Everything beyond became myth. That wasn't ignorance, it was respect. The Romans, brilliant engineers though they were, didn't venture far down either. Their divers collected sponges and coral, but stayed close to the surface. They called the deep Mare Tenebrosum, the dark sea, a place of endings. In the Middle Ages, maps stopped where the ocean began. The deep was not a destination, but a boundary. Then came the great voyages of the 15th and 16th centuries. Ships traced new paths across the world, and the idea of mapping the sea ignited something. Yet even then, explorers charted the surface, never the depth. Measuring the ocean became a guessing game. Sailors tied rocks to ropes, the earliest version of sounding. Drop the weight, wait for it to hit bottom, haul it back, measure the line. Simple, clever, but useless once the sea became too deep. Ropes ended long before the seafloor began. Still, the idea that the deep could be measured lingered. In 1840, the HMS Beagle, the same ship that carried Darwin, made one of the earliest deep soundings in the South Atlantic, lowering thousands of fathoms of rope and estimating over 3,800 meters. Crude, yes, but revolutionary. A century of speculation shifted. The deep wasn't bottomless. It was measurable. Then, the ocean changed forever in 1872. The HMS Challenger set sail, a warship refitted into the world's first true oceanographic vessel. For nearly 4 years, it crisscrossed the globe, mapping depths, sampling sediments, collecting organisms, recording temperatures. It discovered the Mariana Trench. It proved life existed far deeper than anyone believed. It cataloged over 4,000 new species. It transformed fear into curiosity. Its work filled 50 volumes, a foundation for modern ocean science. In the early 20th century, technology took a leap. Echo sounding replaced rope. Sound waves could measure depth instantly. The German ship Meteor mapped the Atlantic in the 1920s using this method, revealing underwater mountains no one knew existed. And in 1930, humans descended into the deep for the first time. William Beebe and Otis Barton created the bathysphere, a steel ball with a tiny window. Lowered by a cable off Bermuda, they plunged to over 900 meters. What they saw stunned them. Glowing jellies, strange translucent creatures, shadows drifting through eternal night. Beebe described the descent as falling into outer space. The bathysphere couldn't move on its own, couldn't shine much light, couldn't protect them for long. Yet it marked the beginning of human presence in the deep. Then came a machine that changed everything, the bathyscape. Built by Auguste Piccard and later improved with his son Jacques, it could dive freely. In 1960, aboard the Trieste, Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh went all the way to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, nearly 11,000 meters deep, the deepest dive in human history. They stayed only minutes, but the message was clear. The deep was reachable. Then progress slowed. The world turned to space. Funding went upward. The ocean, too close and too silent, slipped back into shadow. Still, exploration continued quietly. In the 1970s, Alvin revealed hydrothermal vents. In the 1980s, Japan launched Shinkai 6500. France built Nautil. In 2012, James Cameron returned to the Mariana Trench, alone, with HD cameras and robotic arms, a filmmaker becoming an explorer. And then, modern engineering pushed even further. Victor Vescovo's sub, The Limiting Factor, dove to the deepest point of each ocean multiple times, proving that repeatable, reliable deep exploration is finally possible. Each milestone.
What if the deep sea isn't a problem we're meant to solve, but a presence we're meant to feel? What if its creatures, drifting lights, slow tendrils, soft pulses, are not just biology, but a kind of expression? What if each glow is a syllable, each movement a quiet sentence in a language too ancient and too patient for our brief comprehension? And what if the reason so much of the deep remains unvisited has less to do with technology and more to do with time? Not the time on clocks, but the time of becoming. Because when we look into the deep, we look into a scale beyond our scale, a rhythm beyond our rhythm. The deep sea is not separate from us, it echoes in us. You've never descended to those silent trenches, but you have felt something like them. Not the crushing pressure or cold, but the slowness, the stillness, the depth. In the quietest moments of your life, in late-night silences, in long pauses, in memories that drift like shadows, you've brushed against some echo of it. Because the deep sea is not just a place, it's a sensation. Think of silence, not the absent noise of a room, but true silence, the kind that widens, deepens, becomes almost physical. The kind you feel when the world finally stops insisting. That silence is the deep, heavy, patient, aware without speaking, and somehow familiar, even if you've never touched its waters. No wonder our language leans on ocean metaphors to express emotion. Waves of grief, depths of sadness, tides of longing, drifting thoughts, drowning in work, floating in peace. These aren't coincidences. They are reminders that somewhere inside we understand what it means to feel submerged. And the ocean lives in your body more literally than you might think. The salt in your tears and blood mirrors the salt of ancient seas. The rhythm of your heartbeat echoes tidal cycles. Even your sleep, tonight, right now, mirrors a descent. You sink through layers, wakefulness, drowsiness, drifting, dreaming, the deep. Not falling, but descending, slowly, gently, like lowering through the ocean's own layers. Awareness fades the way sunlight fades past 200 meters. Thoughts blur the way colors dissolve into blue. Eventually, you reach a place without edges, deep sleep, a place you never remember visiting, yet return from restored. And when you rise in the morning, you ascend slowly, like a diver returning to light. No wonder sleeping feels oceanic. No wonder dreams feel like currents. Even our stories reflect this ancient connection. Myths, legends, films, novels, the ocean is everywhere. The mermaid on the rock, the kraken in old maps, the sirens singing from nowhere. Modern tales too, worlds beneath waves, voyages into alien oceans, adventures shaped by tides and storms. The deep becomes both mystery and mirror, a symbol for the parts of ourselves we haven't explored. Children feel this instinctively. Put them beside a tide pool, and suddenly everything becomes discovery. Crabs become monsters or friends, seaweed becomes treasure, shells become stories, the shore becomes a small universe. Somewhere along the way, many adults forget that sense of wonder. But the ocean keeps showing up in our lives anyway, in fashion, design, meditation, screensavers, calming apps, blue light, wave sounds, water metaphors. We don't just admire the sea, we seek it. Because in a world that grows louder every day, the deep sea represents something rare. Scale without noise, vastness without urgency. The ocean does not rush, it does not refresh, it does not check the time. It simply moves in slow, ancient patterns that make our anxieties feel small enough to set down for a moment. That's why we bring ocean imagery into yoga studios, meditation practices, breathing exercises, why designers use marine colors for calm, why soundtracks add distant whale calls. Because the deep is not just scenery, it is medicine. But our lives affect it too, in ways we don't always see. A bottle cap tossed aside may drift for months before sinking into a trench. A piece of microplastic in your shampoo may eventually settle into sediment thousands of meters down. Carbon from a car may warm water far above coral reefs, which then slowly changes the deep below them. The deep remembers, not consciously, but geologically, layer by layer, particle by particle, a slow archive of our choices. So as we explore deeper with robots and sensors, maybe we also need to explore inward to understand our connection to this realm, not just scientifically, but personally. Because the deep sea is not something out there. It is part of the world that shapes the air you breathe, the weather you feel, the food you eat, the sleep you enter. Even now, as you listen and breathe, the ocean is circulating, absorbing,
shifting, remembering. Your dreams tonight may not carry you to deep trenches or glowing jellies, but the chemistry that makes sleep possible, slow waves in your brain, drifting consciousness, is not so different from the ocean's own slow rhythms. Both require surrender, both require trust, both ask you to let go of the surface for a while. So maybe the deep sea is not waiting to be discovered. Maybe it's waiting to be felt. In the softening of your breath, in the loosening of your shoulders, in the quiet moment before sleep when everything finally slows. Because inside you, there is a deep place too, unlit, quiet, patient, a place beyond thought, beyond noise. And maybe that is why the ocean calls to us even from far away, not because it is empty, but because we are not. And maybe, just maybe, that's why the deep sea remains unexplored. Not because we can't reach it, but because a part of us knows the unknown has value, that mystery matters, that some parts of the world and some parts of us deserve to stay vast, quiet, unhurried. So when you think of the deep, don't imagine distance, imagine depth. Not miles, but meaning. Not darkness, but presence. The ocean is not asking us to solve it. It's asking us to listen, to rest, to remember that depth is not frightening, it is grounding, it is ancient, it is home. And tonight, as you drift, you are closer to it than you've ever been. Not in miles, but in mood, in this softness, in this slow descent, in this quiet place where light fades gently and the world feels wide. The deep sea is beneath you, and the deep sea is within you, and both are waiting, patiently, calmly, for you to settle into the silence.
Imagine, just for a moment, that the ocean isn't a location at all, but a doorway, an ancient's threshold not fully open, not fully closed, simply waiting. And the deeper you travel, the more that door feels like it bends reality, not with magic, but with pressure and perception. What if the deep sea isn't Earth's final frontier, but the beginning of something else entirely? Science fiction has always flirted with the ocean, not symbolically, but literally, treating it as a model for alien worlds. Because really, what is the deep ocean if not a living, breathing, extraterrestrial realm we can actually reach? So let's build a vessel, not out of steel, but out of imagination, and descend. The pressure rises, the light fades, sound thickens into something physical. The world becomes slower, heavier. What if time itself feels different down here? Not scientifically, but experientially. Your heartbeat slows. Your thoughts stretch. A minute feels like an hour. A moment becomes dense. Would dreams last longer in such a place? Would memories feel heavier, more permanent? And what of the creatures drifting through the dark, the glowing tendrils, the nearly transparent forms? The strange, slow swimmers that hover like punctuation in a sentence written in shadow. What if they are not separate beings, but pieces of something larger? A distributed mind, not like a human brain, but a network. A consciousness expressed through pulses of light, chemical whispers, migrations, and movement. You wouldn't notice it at first. You'd think you were watching isolated animals, separate lives. But stay long enough, and a rhythm might appear, a pattern, a conversation. And then, perhaps, the pattern would notice you. Absurd? Maybe. But consider. Coral reefs respond to light cycles as a collective. Octopuses change color with emotion. Cuttlefish communicate in shifting patterns. Squid exchange messages in flashes invisible to us. If such complexity exists in shallow waters, why not something far older, far stranger in the deep? And if light is scarce and sound carries farther underwater, wouldn't the true language of the ocean be low frequency, slow, patient? Maybe the sea is speaking already. Maybe we are simply too loud and too hurried to hear it. Now picture this. Somewhere in the deepest part of the earth, not mythic, but geological, could there be a place where pressure and temperature create conditions unlike anywhere else on the planet? What if a dive there didn't crush you, but transported you, not through fantasy, but through physics we don't yet understand? A pocket, adjacent but unreachable, a world beside ours. What would it look like? Would gravity tilt? Would bioluminescence look like stars drifting in liquid space? Would time pass differently there? Would the creatures there understand something about you before you understood anything about them? Or perhaps the deep sea is not a portal at all, but a memory. The ocean is ancient, older than forests, older than mountains. It holds everything that has ever happened to it. Every fall of ash, every drifting feather, every vanished creature. Not consciously, but geologically. Layer by layer, in sediments that span epochs. The deep sea floor is Earth's greatest archive. Fossils and rock tell stories, but the ocean tells them continuously. Volcanic ash, continental dust, meteor particles, decayed organisms all falling, settling, recording. What if future beings, alien, artificial, or something beyond us, search for Earth's origins not in starlight or stone, but in trenches? Because that is where the oldest, quietest stories sleep. And what story would we leave behind? A sudden spike in carbon, a layer of plastic, a bright chemical scar, a geological whisper that says, humans were here. And here's another possibility. Imagine a future where humanity leaves Earth entirely, heading for distant stars. Generations pass, cities drift through space, civilizations evolve. And one day someone looks back at our blue planet and realizes that while we traveled light years away, the deepest parts of our own ocean remained untouched. The greatest mystery in our solar system might not be Saturn's rings or Europa's ice, but the ocean we never truly entered. Strange, isn't it, that the most alien world available to us is also the closest? And while you lie here, drifting into sleep, there are mountains underwater taller than anything on land, canyons wider than the largest desert valleys, creatures stranger than anything fiction has invented. All of it happening right now. No narration, no camera, just depth. And perhaps the most science-fictional truth of all is this: the deep sea exists. It is real. It is beneath you at this moment. What else exists there? What else breathes in the slow black? What languages of light are being exchanged? What worlds are unfolding in the cold and pressure and silence? You might never see them. Few humans ever will. But the fact that they exist, untouched, ongoing, is enough to reshape how we imagine the world. Because science fiction doesn't have to be fiction. The future is not only outward, it is downward. Beneath the waves, beneath the crust, beneath our assumptions. And the greatest unanswered questions may not be about galaxies or black holes or time travel, but something far simpler and far deeper. What lives down there? Why does it remain unknown? And what will we find when we finally slow down enough to look? Maybe the deep sea isn't a landscape at all. Maybe it is a pause, a breath the Earth has been holding for millions of years. A stillness so absolute it becomes language. A silence wide enough to hold all the mysteries we haven't solved and all the ones we aren't ready to. We've spent this journey descending, not only into the ocean but into ideas, into metaphor, into memory. Past science, past story, past everything we think we know. And here at this moment, we touch something rare. The realization that in the age of satellites and rockets and constant noise, the world is still mostly unknown. The deep is not far. It is right here, and its mystery is not a failure of knowledge. It is a gift. The deep sea invites us into slowness, not as escape, but as understanding. Because truth is not always a fact. Sometimes it is a feeling. Sometimes it is the moment you understand you're not supposed to know everything. Maybe the deep isn't unexplored because it is resistant, but because mystery itself is precious. Because some places teach simply by existing. And the deep sea teaches this: you don't have to see something to be changed by it. You don't have to understand a thing for it to matter. You don't have to illuminate the darkness for it to be beautiful. Which brings us back to the beginning. Wonder. Slow, quiet, reverent wonder. The kind that whispers instead of shouts. The kind that humbles without hurting. The kind that deepens the longer you sit with it. The kind you are feeling now, drifting in the soft edges of sleep. You don't need to reach the bottom to feel the depth. You don't need to solve the mystery to love it. You can simply rest here, floating, held by darkness that is not frightening, but gentle. The deep sea remains unexplored, and maybe that is exactly right.
You've never stood on the ocean floor, but you felt something like it. Not the cold or the crushing pressure, but the depth. The slow, quiet depth that lives in the pauses of your own life. Because the deep sea, though distant, isn't separate from you. It ripples into your days in ways too subtle to notice unless you're paying attention. Think for a moment about silence. Not the simple absence of noise, but the full, heavy silence that expands rather than empties. The kind you might feel in the middle of the night when everything else has settled, or during snowfall in a quiet forest, or while walking beside the coast when even your own thoughts seem to soften. That is the silence of the deep. Not lonely, not empty, just vast, filled with presence and something like memory. A silence that feels almost alive. And somehow, that silence echoes inside us, not because we understand it, but because we recognize it. We use ocean metaphors to explain emotions because the body remembers what the mind forgets. We speak of waves of grief, tides of change, depths of joy, floods of relief. We say someone is underwater with responsibilities, drifting in their thoughts, anchored by someone they love. These expressions aren't poetic coincidence. They're evidence of an ancient connection, a reminder that the sea is not only around us, but within us. Even physically, the connection is literal. Nearly half the oxygen you breathe comes from ocean phytoplankton, tiny drifting plants you've never seen, but depend on every moment. They live near the surface, catching sunlight, creating the breath that becomes your breath. Their rhythm becomes your rhythm. Even your sleep mirrors the ocean. Tonight, as you drift downward through the layers of awareness, your mind follows a pattern remarkably like descending through the sea. Light at the top, shadows deepening, thoughts fading, boundaries dissolving, until you reach your own Hadal zone, deep sleep, where consciousness loosens its grip and your body's oldest rhythms take over. Then, just like a diver rising gently toward dawn, you'll ascend again in the morning. It's no coincidence that the language of sleep mirrors the language of water, drifting off, sinking into dreams, floating awake. The ocean also shapes our imagination. Stories gathered through centuries echo with its mystery. Myths of sunken cities, legends of sea spirits, tales of creatures too strange to name. Even in modern storytelling, films, novels, animation, the sea often plays a role not as scenery, but as a character, a mirror, a question, a doorway. Children understand this intuitively. Give a child a tide pool, and they'll turn it into an entire universe. Everything becomes a discovery. Shimmering shells, small crabs, swirling currents. The boundary between imagination and reality dissolves. Somewhere along the way, adulthood teaches us to stop looking for magic in small pools of water. But the ocean keeps appearing anyway. In our decor, our metaphors, our art, our meditations. Screensavers of waves, yoga studios named after tides, ambient tracks filled with whale calls, blue tones meant to soothe. Even far from shore, we build little reminders of the sea, because the sea offers something we crave: scale. A scale large enough to hold our worries without breaking. A calm vastness we rarely feel in daily life. The deep sea especially represents a kind of patience we have forgotten. It doesn't hurry, it doesn't refresh, it doesn't ask anything of us. It just is. Ancient, steady, cyclical. And in a world full of urgency, that slowness feels like a balm. Yet our choices affect it. Even from afar, a bottle tossed aside might travel across currents for months before sinking into a trench. The microplastics in your soap may drift downward, settling into quiet sediment. A small shift in climate above might warm waters that ripple downward into ecosystems that depend on stability. We don't always see these connections, but the deep records them. Layer after layer, a slow archive of human influence. Still, this isn't a story of guilt. It's a story of awareness. Because just as the deep influences us, we influence it. And understanding that relationship is part of understanding ourselves. Even as you listen now, the ocean is moving. Tides pulse, currents wander, nutrients drift. Whales send low-frequency songs across basins like long-distance messages. The deep listens, the deep remembers, and the deep waits. Your dreams tonight may not take you to hydrothermal vents or shimmering jellies, but the same surrender that lets you fall asleep, the softening of thought, the loosening of control, echoes the surrender required to enter the deep. To understand it, you must release the surface. Let light fade. Let certainty drift away. Move at the pace of water. Both sleep and the deep sea ask something simple and profound. Trust. Trust the descent. Trust the quiet. Trust the unknown. So maybe the deep sea is not just something beneath the world. Maybe it is something inside you. A quiet space, rarely visited, rarely mapped, but undeniably there. A place where thought dissolves into presence. A place without noise, without rush. A place that simply waits. And maybe that's why the ocean feels familiar to even those who've never stood near it. Because we carry its memory. In our blood, in our language, in our dreams, in the quietest parts of ourselves. So when you think of the deep, don't picture darkness as danger. Picture it as depth, spacious, silent, patient. picture it as the world's longest breath. Picture it as the place where noise goes to rest. And know this, as you lie here breathing slowly, you are already closer to the deep than you realize, not in distance, but in stillness, in mood, in the slow drift taking you toward sleep. The deep sea exists beneath you, and a deep calm exists within you. Both vast, both quiet, both ancient, and both waiting, not to be solved, but to be felt. So let yourself drift. Let your thoughts loosen like sand falling through water. Let your breath slow into something tidal. Let the day sink away. Nothing to fix, nothing to chase, just depth. Quiet, gentle depth. The kind that holds you without asking anything in return. The kind that hums softly beneath the noise of your waking life. The kind that carries you peacefully toward sleep.